Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our HR Tech Talk on why candidate experience still matters and how to make it better. I'm really excited to talk all things candidate experience today with the wonderful and very knowledgeable Robin Stencil. But first, I just want to say thank you. I realize that the virtual HR Tech experience is a new experience for all of us, and you're probably in a whirlwind trying to see a lot of sessions and a lot of booths and still do your day job at the same time. So I really appreciate you spending some of your afternoon here with us. I'm Brianna Harper. I'm on the marketing team at Outmatch, and a big part of my job is to keep a pulse on the trends and the topics that are most important to HR. So I joined Outmatch about 5 years ago, and that whole time, candidate experience has been a really important topic. I've never known a world where candidate experience wasn't a really important topic. So Robin, I'm curious to hear from you. Over the course of your career, how has this trend changed and evolved?
Yeah, so I started my HR career, I feel like like the dark ages 100 years ago, but many moons ago, and really got into HR as an operator who thought, we can do things better if we have better people processes and better connections, better technology, better information. But a big part of that, I was in a retail environment at the time, and what was really interesting to me was sort of how we recruited. And so part of that was, what was this experience that happened? And I mean, look, a lot's happened in technology since then, but it was still about, how do you bring people in? How do they have a good experience? And then how do you get them connected? And how do you almost start to onboard them a little bit earlier in that experience, so that they're ready to go, particularly if you think of retail during high volume times like holidays, where you don't have much time. It was really kind of about making something that was a good experience so that people were excited when they hit the floor and started talking to customers, but kind of ready to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, bringing us up to, if you look even last year, experience was a really big part of the HR Tech conference. It was a part of the keynote. There were a lot of sessions about it. So just looking at the past year, a lot has changed. We went from a really tight labor market to a labor market that looks very different. So Robin, in your mind, what has changed, or maybe what hasn't changed in terms of how important candidate experience is today?
It's interesting. I mean, certainly there have been organizations who really focused on candidate experience. And I can't imagine, even in a new world, they're going to say, you know what, that's not important. Let me stop doing the great work that I did. So we'll have companies that'll keep doing what they're doing, maybe even enhancing a little bit. And then probably there are companies who are wondering at this point, I didn't do a lot. I've got a lot of candidates in the marketplace. Do I need to continue to work on this? And the answer is yes. And there's a couple reasons why. The market is what the market is today, but we didn't expect it to be this way. So just as it went down, it can go back up. So how are you creating that relationship where people want to come work for you? Or even if they realize maybe it's not the right fit for them, how do they go tell somebody else to come work for you? And that's about experience, right? If you go and you have go to a restaurant and you have a great experience, you tell all your friends. Maybe not all of them, maybe tell some of them. If you have a not great experience, you for sure tell all of them, and you tell all those that you don't even know through your social media channels as well. So that experience is important. But I think even more important now is really looking at experience as a way to increase performance. And so one way to think about it is, the more that I can induct somebody into the experience, they're learning more about my company. The more they learn about my company, the more prepared they're going to be when they start the job. So if you think about this, and I've had some conversations with CHROs where they talk about sort of pre-onboarding. But even if we have pre-onboarding, so, the pre-onboarding before someone starts, but what about that onboarding before someone even is selected? And how do you start to create that experience so that, again, they know a lot about your organization? And I think that's what experience is about. It's an education process. It's just like when you get your customers, right? And you start to think about kind of the education process, when someone's buying, it's first educating them, giving them more information as they get kind of along the way, and then helping them buy. This is the same thing.
Yeah, it sounds like avenues, right, to select yourself in or select yourself out, because so much of what we do today is really driven by our own research rather than having someone walk us along the way.
Yeah, and I think if you think about sort of candidate experience in a way, at Outmatch, we talk about how does a candidate-driven experience. So, what does that look like? Well, that's the ability to come in and apply for a job, maybe ask a few key questions to see if I'm a fit for that job. And if I am, then moving on, finding out more as we think about assessment through the process, and then, maybe even simulation. So kind of how do I go in and act the job? And then how do I get to that point where maybe I'm next doing a video interview to showcase myself? So I have multiple modalities to sort of say, how do I fit? I've got sort of my written, whether it's resume or just application. I've got a little bit of insight to me through an assessment. I've got a deeper, if you take a skills assessment, and you know a little bit more about my skills from me showing you. And then I get to really sell myself in a video where I get to talk about it. And so I think the great thing about that is candidates can push themselves along, but they can also create things where if I'm not good at one of those, I have a chance, or if I'm not the best resume writer, but I've got enough key skills, I've got the opportunity to really kind of make up for that along the way, as an example.
Yeah, and what I love about that is the communication throughout as well. So you're never really left in the dark, which I know is one of the biggest problems in candidate experience still. I mean, I know that it's something we've talked about and we've looked at as, really important in creating a candidate experience that doesn't ghost people or leave people in the dark. And my husband, for example, was just on the job market. And I've always looked at candidate experience through the lens of the employer, and I really got to see him go through the experience, and I saw the other side of this. And so a lot of times he would apply for a job and never hear back, or he would apply for a job and do another step or two and then never hear back. And probably the most frustrating part of that was when he would see that job posting pop back up in his feed. So he knew that the job hadn't been filled, but he never got an explanation as to why, especially when in his mind, he met the requirements of being a qualified candidate for that job.
I think that's a really great point, is this idea about not giving feedback along the way. And I think one of the things that we do sometimes is we put candidates in, we're afraid to move them out of the process because we think, what if I need to go back to the well? But if the reality is I'm not going back to that person, if I've got to go back and repost, I'm not going back to that person. So now all of a sudden that experience is, wait, I don't know what just happened. Again, I think if we start to really take a lead from marketers, from an HR perspective, and we start to think about how would that as a customer experience, what does that look like, we can really start to drive more data and insights. And we can also, quite frankly, if we're making decisions faster along, we can come back at those decisions. Those become data points. We can learn from them. I mean, maybe we're doing some of these decision points through AI or machine learning, and they give us a way to sort of look and have insights into what's happening in our process. And then we can tweak and refine, and we can really move much more quickly in our time to hire or time to fill. So if we think about, really looking at kind of time to hire, we're looking at once I've sourced and found candidates, which let's just say for some jobs is not as much of a challenge as it was a few months ago. But if I look at that, and I've got candidates in my process, how quickly do they get through my process? And we should be looking at that from an efficiency standpoint. And sometimes I think we forget that. We look at, do we kind of time to fill, right? So I've hired someone, great, they're in the process, that took me 90 days. But what about that experience for someone who sat in there? And even beyond that 90 days, right, we hear of kind of those things of people sitting there 2-3 months, or maybe not at all, ever kind of, getting that next step.
Yeah, Robin, you mentioned that if you were already investing in candidate experience kind of pre-COVID, you probably didn't stop what you were doing. But for someone that's trying to build that business case now, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think, look, times are potentially tough depending on your business. Some businesses are doing fantastic. Some businesses are kind of coming out of a tough period when really things were locked down. They're maybe just reopening. I think it's about what people are looking for now. And if you think about this, if you were one of those businesses who really had to slow down, you're trying to think about, how do I accelerate performance? And I think if I were making a business case now, I would really focus on how creating a great experience can help me accelerate getting candidates more quickly, getting people hired more quickly, which potentially means more revenue or more cost savings or whatever that happens for that employee or that job, whatever metric you're using, you'll start to be able to productivity, let's just say it's a productivity measure, if you come into that, now you're able to be more productive. And that means hiring managers are getting more done more quickly. And that's really the angle that I think makes the most sense, and really probably the most important thing for a lot of businesses, regardless of where you are, from a business health perspective.
Yeah, and probably looking at, what's the cost of doing nothing? What's the cost of not
Right.
investing in a solution here?
That's right.
So since we're at HR Tech, this is a showcase. This is all about, what's the newest technology on the market, what vendors are out there, what are kind of your opportunities to invest in something new. Robin, how would you go about this process? If you're looking at, say, there are 100 possible vendors out there who could help improve your candidate experience, how would you really narrow down that list?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's you've got to look at your business. I was thinking about this morning. If I were sitting in the VP of talent acquisition and had the opportunity or the task of sort of revamping my process, what would I think about first? Well, I think before you get to HR Tech, hopefully you understand the problem, right? What is it that you're hearing from your hiring managers? What's your recruiting team telling you? What are some candidates that you hired? What are they telling you about your experience? And what about some people you didn't hire? And do you have that data and information? Because if you really understand that, then you can understand maybe what's working well and what's not. And so now you can start to create a list of from what's working well, where do I still have gaps for the things that aren't, and how do I start to create that list? I need something that can, right, communicate to candidates in between an experience, in between a process, or whatever that is that you're looking for, to be really crisp about that, and then going in and making sure you really understand that from a vendor perspective. Because look, I think there's a lot of fantastic vendors that can do a lot. I think starting with what is your need today, and then kind of imagining what might be coming next. Because again, hopefully you're picking a partner that can grow with you. So again, how do you start to look at that growth period, and what does that look like? And I think I'll go back to Outmatch as an example for somebody coming in and talking to Outmatch. We're creating a talent decision platform, if you will. How do you make better talent decisions with data and information? We're really focused on the hiring side and selection piece of this, but we know, and we're talking to people, we're starting to grow. As we grow, we'll add to what happens post-hire as well. So if that becomes important to you, you want to look at that just as an example. So again, what's the roadmap for the company that you're looking at, and how do you really start to understand that?
Yeah, I mean, you said, as we were preparing for this session, you said the word experience is so big. So I think what you said just now, in breaking it down, what does experience mean to your business or your initiative right now? Does experience really mean you need a solution for efficiency? Or maybe you're looking for a solution for candidate communication, or maybe you're looking for a solution for employer branding. I mean, those are all kind of pieces of the experience that you can pull together. But framing it in that way, I think, is really helpful for people.
Yeah, and sort of ranking those things, right? They're probably all important to you, but what does that look like more broadly?
Yeah, and you said, Robin, in one of your past roles, you were kind of brought this infinite possibilities, what your ecosystem could look like with a lot of bolt-ons, or, possibly considering some custom development to get exactly what you were looking for in your experience at that time, in your candidate experience at that time. So how did you kind of navigate that type of decision? What were the challenges you were faced with, bolt-ons versus custom development?
It was interesting, and it really wasn't all that long ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And maybe I was the only person in the world who didn't know this, but we had really started looking at some things. And at the time we thought the challenge was our applicant tracking system. And then someone came in and said, look, here's how you should think about your applicant tracking system. It's important. You need a place to house candidates. You need some workflow. You've got all these things, and applicant tracking systems are great at doing that. But here's all the other things that have happened. Again, think about this back from the marketing perspective. You want to be able to, especially in a tight labor market, you want to be able to court candidates along the way. You want to be able to educate them. You're looking at how do employees, manage your process. So again, you've got employees who are coming into the funnel of things. You've got employee referrals that are coming in. And so really looking at all the things that happen along the way. You've got assessment vendors, video vendors. I can't even remember all. There were things that I never even hadn't even thought about doing, right? That there was a niche for those things. And the aha moment for me was, okay, so if there's all of these things, what are the things that are most important? And to your point, what was most broken about the process that we needed to fix? Well, we knew we had a sourcing challenge. So it was part of that was, how are you going about and getting data from your system? But then also, how do we create a great experience when you're, I was working for a large global organization that had a lot of field offices. And so how do you create something that gives the field the autonomy to be unique, but yet is consistent in the process, so that I feel like, particularly in places where we'd have multiple locations less than a few miles away from one another, and sometimes very different experiences. So how did we create that similar experience?
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Let's see, we've got about 5 minutes left in our talk here. So I'd like to dig in really to the diversity and inclusion side of this. And as you were talking, I also had this kind of moment where I was realizing you were talking about the ATS. So I'll just back up for just a moment. I was thinking of my role in marketing, that Salesforce for us is really the repository. It's the record keeper. But we certainly need technology on top of that in order to nurture people and communicate with people. So that was just a correlation that popped in my head as you were talking. So yeah, with our last few minutes here, let's just talk about how diversity and inclusion can really be impacted when you're doing this work to improve candidate experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, diversity and inclusion, no matter where you are, if you're in the US, you probably have a focus on this with just all the conversations we're having around diversity and inclusion. But even if you're not US based, probably each country has something that they're working on from a diversity and an inclusion perspective. And so as you start to think about that, you're bringing in different candidates, so they're going to have different perspectives, and you're bringing them in through a process that, for most people today, has a lot of people in that process. And with that comes a lot of our biases, probably most unconscious biases, but yet, maybe some are conscious, but probably more unconscious bias as we go along the way. So we look for things, I had said in the past, I look for people because I grew up and kind of started my HR career in a retail environment. So I tend to have a bias towards giving someone a chance who's maybe had a retail background, knowing sort of what that looks like, because I can relate to that. But that becomes a bias, and maybe there's other things that if I just look at that, I'm excluding. I think as I kind of walked through a little bit of how you might automate some of your process. And if you put kind of AI or along that, and it's helping you make those decisions, it's taking out your biases and it's making suggestions purely based on data. Now you've got to make sure that you've taught, your any automation or any machine learning in the right way, and make sure that it doesn't have biases. It doesn't pick up my bias towards retail, right, isn't sort of put into that. And so you really want it to be very transparent and understand that, we would say there was a human component to come in and look and check and understand what's happening along the way. But the more we can, again, think about the candidate sort of driving that experience that they have, the more likely we're to end up with a diverse pool of candidates as we get into really the interview stage. And that's really where we need to be. And that becomes really important, and starting to look at it. We looked at this across our several different customers and looking at this. And one of the things we saw was, from an assessment standpoint, we had one group of people who was doing better on assessment than the other, yet that group wasn't making it to hire. So now what was happening in that situation, and how do we make that better? And really going out and talking to customers about what they can do as they start to think about that.
Yeah, and if you think about, what traditionally is the phone screen stuff, I mean, not only is that like 30 minutes for every single candidate you're trying to schedule. And I know that about half the time is going to be spent, the recruiter is selling the company to the candidates. You still are left with maybe 15 minutes to actually learn about that person. And it's possible that that's not even the best way as a candidate to be able to showcase yourself.
Or as a recruiter to spend your time, quite frankly, right? When we talk about this idea of relationships, but the reality is you're kind of coming in and you've got a checklist and you're going to hit a series of things and you're going to push them on. Now, what if your process did that for you? And it was really kind of looking at that. And now as a recruiter, you are spending time with the best candidates, really helping determine, and your hiring managers, to make sure you make the best hires.
Yeah. So it's removing a lot of those old inefficiencies, and then also kind of creating new opportunities, new mediums for people, whether it's video, simulation, a really objective assessment. You've got a lot of different factors going for you if you're the right candidate, and then hopefully you add in those communication elements so that if you're not the right candidate, you're told so, and you maybe even have something, some feedback that's given to you about your process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Robin, this was a really great session. I'm so glad we got to do this HR Tech Talk together. I hope for anyone who's listening in, if you've had any questions for us along the way, you've used that chat bar on the side, but if not, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. Come stop by our booth, outmatch.com at HR Tech, or just come find us at outmatch.com, and we can answer any other questions you have about candidate experience or our approach to candidate experience and how we're solving that. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a really good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.